would be governed by one single man with growing power, growing wealth, and a great, great threat.
While in the past, Damascus had been an ally of the Crusaders, it had recently become hostile.
The people of Damascus got really terrified because no one else before came that close to the city walls. The Damascenes simply, like any other inhabitants, trying to defend their homes, trying to defend their families, trying to defend their habitats, their livelihood.
The Damascenes could have called on the ruler of Aleppo, Nur al-Din, to rescue them, but that would mean surrendering their independence. They were determined to defend their city themselves.
They were really defending Islam against the Crusaders, against the Frankish army, and they were really looking to die, to go to heaven, according to their beliefs.
If there was one man who embodied their spirit of defiance, it was 71-year-old lawyer al-Findalawi. His story has become part of the folklore of Damascus. His tale is still told today by storytellers in the city cafes.
The
Crusaders believed in their evil hearts they could take Damascus. 50,000 infantry and cavalry marched on our city, and the Muslims challenged them to fight. In an orchard by the walls, the battle began. Al-Findalawi, the old lawyer, was determined to fight the infidel. So he went into battle, striking down Christians in the orchard like a man possessed. He said, "I have offered myself for sale, and God has bought me."
قاتل الفرنج هجم عليهم ضربنا والرماه والخامس لعن امه بعجبه.
But through the night, the townspeople became demoralized by the horror of the fighting. After a fierce struggle, the Crusaders overwhelmed the Muslims and closed in on the city walls, closer than any army in ancient or modern times.
رأى الفندلاوي بالمنام. قال له
Al-Findalawi continued to fight bravely and refused to withdraw in obedience to God Almighty. But alas, he fell in battle, a martyr for the faith.
For days, the battle raged in the orchards surrounding the city, and thousands of Muslims lost their lives. The proudly independent Damascenes now had little choice. They sent word to Nur al-Din, pleading for him to send his army. It was just the news Nur al-Din had been waiting for, but it left Louis with a crucial decision: to stay and fight a growing Muslim opposition, or to retreat.
If they withdrew from Damascus, they felt they would be shamed. If they stayed and fought, they might be defeated. So what they actually did was the worst of all worlds. They shifted their siege from one side of the city to the other, and then decided they had to retreat anyway. This was military incompetence.
Louis returned home to Europe, shamed and defeated. After so much hope, expense, and suffering, his second crusade had ended in disaster. Not only had he turned his back on the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem, he had strengthened the resolve of the Muslims. For Christians, the consequences were calamitous.
They abandoned the siege and returned home. As a result, fewer people undertook this pilgrimage thereafter. From this day on, the conditions for the Latins in the East declined.
When the Second Crusade failed, the Muslim world was hugely, hugely relieved. Their God had blessed them with this divine victory. Also, of course, they were terribly confident. I mean, the last time the Franks had come over in huge numbers, the First Crusade, they defeated the Muslims. Now kings had come over from Western Europe and had not succeeded. This meant the Westerners were not invincible. Muslims could succeed and could, perhaps, in the end, throw the Christians out.
The failure of the Second Crusade was just what Nur al-Din needed to win over Damascus. Through intimidation and charm, he entreated them to unite with him. Only as one, he preached, could they have the strength to overtake all the Crusader states. The Damascenes finally succumbed to his relentless campaign. In April 1154, they invited him to enter the city.
People rejoiced at the prospects of good times ahead. Rich and poor, peasant and artisan, they all offered their prayers to grant the Emir a longer life and victory over the Christians.
They were throwing rice, petals, flowers, people really shouting, hooraying him and praising his courage, and really they were happy.
Nur al-Din was the first to try and give the Arabs a feeling that we are one people, and that if we get together, we can actually do it.
For the first time, the two powerful, wealthy cities of Muslim Syria were united under the same ruler, a man focused on the jihad, whose objective was one day to drive the Crusaders out.
The entire eastern flank of the Crusader kingdom was now in Nur al-Din's control. He was tightening the noose, and now began the final phase of his master plan, to surround the Christians entirely by taking control of a rich and powerful land to the south, Egypt. By 1160, the goal of the Muslims, now united under Nur al-Din, was to encircle the Crusader kingdom. He already ruled Syria. Now he wanted to take command of Egypt and its independent capital, Cairo.
Cairo was like a beautiful bride with an impotent husband, waiting to be taken, and absolutely necessary in Nur al-Din's eyes if there was any chance of defeating the Crusaders. And there was also a big worry on the part of Nur al-Din that if we don't take it, the Crusaders might.
The Crusaders also coveted Cairo. Egypt was a rich and strategically positioned country, and in the early 1160s, it was up for grabs. Egypt wanted to remain independent. It was the stronghold of the Shia branch of Islam, and was just as determined to resist Nur al-Din's Sunni Orthodox Muslims as the Christians. But in 1168, the Christians made a fatal mistake and handed Nur al-Din a great advantage. The Crusaders perpetrated a brutal massacre of Shia Muslims in an Egyptian town near Cairo.
If the Crusaders have acted differently, they would have taken Cairo with the greatest of ease. For the city notables were ready to surrender it. But when they heard of the massacres perpetrated by the Christians, they decided to resist. The Egyptians were left with little choice but to plead with Nur al-Din for help.
Nur al-Din was only too eager to help. He sent in his most talented and ambitious young general to help the Egyptians defend Cairo. His name was Saladin. To the Muslim world, Saladin is a legend. His heroic reputation was carefully crafted by one man, his close friend and confidant, Baha al-Din.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد.
Baha al-Din was close to and a great admirer of Saladin.
صلى الله عليه وسلم. I bore witness to the genuineness of the rare stories told about the noble hero, Saladin.
Like a medieval spin doctor, he put a gloss on the great deeds of his master.
One could swear that from the time he set out, he did not spend one silver coin except on a jihad.
Saladin shared his master Nur al-Din's ambition to control both Syria and Egypt and drive out the Crusaders, but under his own leadership. And that meant taking on Nur al-Din himself. His first step was to assume command of all of Egypt from the Shia rulers, by any means necessary.
The fact that some people who were in Saladin's way, in his path to power, conveniently died at appropriate moments, has led other people to suggest at the time and since that Saladin had something to do with those convenient demises. That's impossible to prove. People did die with distressing regularity.
By the end of 1169, with all his rivals conveniently out of the way, Saladin was now the unchallenged ruler of Egypt, controlling as much territory as his mentor, Nur al-Din.
Nur al-Din used to call Saladin the ambitious. Definitely, Nur al-Din wanted to punish Saladin for his treason.
5 years later, before he could cut his young lieutenant down to size, Nur al-Din died under mysterious circumstances. He was 57. Saladin rushed from Cairo to Nur al-Din's fortress stronghold Aleppo, but a successor had already been announced. The son of Nur al-Din was the new ruler. It was 71-year-old lawyer al-Findalawi. His story has become part of the folklore of Damascus. His tale is still told today by storytellers in the city cafes.
The
Crusaders believed in their evil hearts they could take.
Would be governed by one single man with growing power, growing wealth, and a great, great threat.
While in the past, Damascus had been an ally of the Crusaders, it had recently become hostile.
The people of Damascus got really terrified because no one else before came that close to the city walls. The Damascenes simply, like any other inhabitants, trying to defend their homes, trying to defend their families, trying to defend their habitat, their livelihood.
The Damascenes could have called on the ruler of Aleppo, Nur al-Din, to rescue them, but that would mean surrendering their independence. They were determined to defend their city themselves.
They were really defending Islam against the Crusaders, against the Frankish army, and they were really looking to die, to go to heaven, according to their beliefs.
If there was one man who embodied their spirit of defiance,
Damascus. 50,000 infantry and cavalry marched on our city, and the Muslims challenged them to fight. In an orchard by the walls, the battle began.